Welcome to our in-depth look at one of the most intense urban battles in modern military history, the Battle of Mogadishu. Fought on October 3 to 4, 1993, this pivotal event was a crucial part of Operation Gothic Serpent, a U.S.-led mission in Somalia. Join us as we explore the conflict's origins, the gripping battle itself, and its far-reaching consequences. To understand the Battle of Mogadishu, we must first explore the roots of the Somali Civil War. In 1991, after a long civil war that began in the 1980s, President Siad Barre's regime was overthrown, plunging the country into chaos. The civil war devastated Somalia's agriculture, leading to widespread starvation. By 1992, over 300,000 Somalis had died from hunger, and another 1.5 million were suffering, prompting international intervention. The United Nations responded with Operation Provide Relief, aiming to deliver humanitarian aid. However, the mission faced significant obstacles due to warlords' control over food supplies. Much of the aid was hijacked by warlords, who used it to gain power and trade for weapons. Among these warlords, Mohammed Farah, aided of the Somali National Alliance (SNA), became a dominant force in Mogadishu. In response to the worsening situation, U.S. President George H.W. Bush launched Operation Restore Hope in December 1992 to secure the environment for aid distribution. 10 C-130s and 400 personnel were deployed to Mombasa, Kenya, airlifting aid to Somalia's remote areas and reducing reliance on vulnerable truck convoys. In 6 months, these efforts delivered 48,000 tons of food and medical supplies to over 3 million starving Somalis. Despite these efforts, the massive death toll and displacement continued, with aid workers frequently attacked. This led to a major coalition operation to protect humanitarian activities, with U.S. Marines securing key facilities in Mogadishu. On March 3, 1993, UN Secretary-General Boutros Ghali recommended a larger UN force to restore effective governance in Somalia. This led to the establishment of a UN force, comprising soldiers from the US, Pakistan, and other nations. On June 5, 1993, Aidid's militia attacked Pakistani forces inspecting an arms cache at Radio Mogadishu, fearing the UN intended to seize the station. Radio was vital for news in Somalia, and its control was crucial for both the Somali National Alliance (SNA) and the UN. The attack resulted in 24 Pakistani soldiers dead and 57 wounded, along with casualties among Italian and US soldiers. In response, on June 6, 1993, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 837, calling for the arrest and prosecution of those responsible for the attack. Though not naming Aidid directly, it held the SNA responsible, making the hunt for Aidid a major UN focus. On the morning of July 12, 1993, a significant meeting took place at a Mogadishu villa owned by Aidid's Interior Minister, Abdi Hassan Awale. The attendees included prominent Somalis and high-ranking elders from Aidid's Haber Gidr clan and other Hoi sub-clans. The purpose of the meeting and the identities of those present remain disputed. U.S. and UN officials claimed it was a gathering of Aidid's War Council, including those responsible for attacks on Pakistani UN forces. However, the SNA, survivors and witnesses, supported by organizations like Human Rights Watch and Doctors Without Borders, along with journalists such as Scott Peterson, argue that it was a peace initiative to end the conflict between the SNA and the UN mission. Regardless of its intent, UN-authorized American forces were ordered to attack the meeting. At 10:18 a.m., 6 American Cobra helicopters fired into the villa. UN officials reported 13 casualties, including high-level commanders linked to the June 5 attack on Pakistani soldiers. Aidid's spokesman claimed 73 were killed, including many prominent clan elders, which the UN denied. The raid, known as Bloody Monday, is widely seen as a turning point that shifted Somali public opinion against the UN mission, particularly the U.S. contingent. Numerous aid and human rights organizations condemned the attack. Doctors Without Borders President Ronnie Brauman declared, "For the first time in Somalia, there has been a killing under the flag of humanitarianism." Human Rights Watch described the attack as mass murder. This strike marked the first time UN forces in Somalia had specifically targeted individuals instead of arms caches, escalating the conflict. Bloody Monday became the deadliest attack in Mogadishu since the civil war began. For the Haber-Gidr clan, it signaled the start of open war with American forces, culminating in the Battle of Mogadishu 3 months later. Following the raid, AIDID decided to specifically target American soldiers. Following Bloody Monday, Mogadishu became increasingly hostile to foreign troops. On August 8, in a previously safe area, the SNA detonated a bomb against a U.S. military Humvee, killing 4 soldiers. This incident marked the largest single killing of U.S. troops in Somalia to that point. 2 weeks later, another bomb injured 7 more soldiers. In response, U.S. President Bill Clinton approved the deployment of a task force composed of elite Special Forces units, including 400 U.S. Army Rangers and Delta Force operators. To understand the Battle of Mogadishu, we must first examine the Somali National Alliance (SNA) insurgents led by Farah Aidid. The SNA was formed in June 1992 after various factions successfully defended against an offensive by Somali dictator Siad Barre to retake Mogadishu. The size and structure of the SNA forces involved in the battle are unclear. Estimates vary widely, with figures often suggesting over 1,000 fighters engaged at different points during the 17-hour battle. The number is complicated by volunteers who joined the skirmishes and the use of for-hire gunmen. Colonel Sharif Hassan Jumali, the deputy commander of the SNA High Commission on Defense, was the tactical commander on the ground during the battle. Jumali, a 45-year-old former Somali army officer, had attended a Soviet military academy and studied further in Italy. He gathered combat experience during the Ogaden War with Ethiopia and the Somali Civil War that began in 1991. Aidid, Jumali, and other SNA commanders drew on guerrilla warfare tactics from Chinese and Vietnamese sources and advice from Somali Mujahideen veterans of the Soviet-Afghan War. Despite having heavier weaponry in their stockpiles, SNA forces primarily used light infantry weapons during the battle, including AK-47 assault rifles, RPG-7 grenade launchers, sniper rifles, mortars, mines, and machine guns. During the battle, SNA forces fought alongside hundreds of irregulars, mostly untrained civilians, including women and children, who had grievances against UN troops. Human rights abuses, civilian casualties from U.S. airstrikes, forced evictions, and the lack of legal recourse for wrongs committed by UN forces fueled animosity. Days before the battle, American mortar crews had fired shells into dense neighborhoods, killing a family of 8 and injuring 34. On October 3, 1993, a CIA informant reported that 2 of Aidid's principal advisors, Omar Salad Elmi and Abdi Hassan Awale, would be meeting near the Olympic Hotel. The area around the hotel was considered very hostile, and UN forces had previously avoided it. The plan to capture the targets was straightforward. The informant would mark the meeting site by opening the hood of his vehicle. Delta operators would then assault the building using MH-6 Little Bird helicopters. 4 Ranger Chalks under Captain Michael D. Steele would fast rope from hovering MH-60L Black Hawks, creating a defensive perimeter around the target building. Special Operations Forces, including Bravo Company 3rd Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Delta Force, and the 160th Aviation Battalion, would capture Elmi and Awale. A convoy of 12 vehicles, led by Lieutenant Colonel Danny McKnight, would then extract the assault team and their prisoners. The entire operation was expected to take no longer than 30 minutes. The SNA divided South Mogadishu into 18 military sectors, each with its own field officer and a radio network linking them. They had a deep understanding of the area around the Olympic Hotel and could quickly mass troops within 30 minutes. Colonel Jamali had studied Task Force Rangers' previous operations and applied lessons from guerrilla insurgencies. He believed that to negate the American advantage of speed and surprise, they had to neutralize the helicopters. This would draw the Americans into a protracted fight where SNA forces could use ambushes and barricades to offset the superior American firepower with sheer numbers. Most U.S. commanders underestimated the number of RPGs available to the SNA and the threat they posed to helicopters. Jamali believed the U.S. Special Forces underestimated the tactical capacity of SNA fighters, who had extensive urban combat experience in Mogadishu. At 1350, Task Force Ranger analysts received intelligence of Omar Salad's location, and the command was given to initiate the operation. Led by MH-6 Little Birds, 16 helicopters took off from the airport, making the approximately 4-minute flight to the target site. To deceive Somali forces, the formation initially flew past the target before turning back en masse. Soon after takeoff, American aircrew observed Somalis lighting burning tires around the city, a tactic previously used by the SNA to signal incursions and organize counterattacks. At 1542, the Little Birds carrying Delta operators reached the target. Almost immediately, small arms fire began. 2 Black Hawks carrying the 2nd Delta Assault arrived and deployed their teams as the 4 Ranger Chalks prepared to rope onto the 4 corners surrounding the target building. According to high-ranking Somali National Alliance officials, the initial 10 minutes were chaotic. After gaining a basic understanding of the situation, SNA Colonel Sharif Hassan Jamali issued orders for SNA forces to converge on the battle site and organize ambushes along likely reinforcement routes from UN bases. 10 minutes later, the roads surrounding the Olympic Hotel were covered with militia and nearly sealed. SNA platoons arriving from other parts of South Mogadishu splintered into squads of 6 or 7 men each. After the initial call to arms, SNA commanders ceased radio transmissions to avoid American jamming, relying instead on handwritten dispatches and couriers. The ground extraction convoy was supposed to reach the captives a few minutes after the operation began, but it was delayed by Somali citizens and militia who formed barricades with rocks, wreckage, rubbish, and burning tires. Eventually, the convoy reached near the Olympic Hotel, waiting for Delta and Rangers to complete their mission. During the operation's initial moments, Private First Class Todd Blackburn lost his grip while fast roping from Super 67, falling 70 feet onto the street. He sustained severe injuries and required evacuation by a column of 3 Humvees. On the way back, Sergeant Dominic Pilla was killed instantly by a bullet to the head while the Humvee column came under heavy fire. The column returned to base riddled with bullet holes and emitting smoke. About 40 minutes into the assault, Black Hawk Super 61 was struck by an RPG-7, sending it into an uncontrollable spin. It crashed in a residential area, coming to rest against a building wall in an alleyway about 300 yards east of the target building. Both pilots were killed, and 2 crew members were severely wounded. 2 surviving snipers began defending the crash site. SNA militiamen called out local residents to defend their homes, and the militia fighters, in organized squads, quickly began to fan in and out of nearby buildings, alleys and trees to avoid the Little Bird helicopters converging to cover the wreck of Super 61. A nearby MH-6 Little Bird, Star 41, quickly flew down to the crash site. The pilot controlled the helicopter with one hand while firing a machine gun with the other, while the co-pilot dashed into the alley to help the 2 Delta snipers, one of whom was mortally wounded, into the helicopter. A combat search and rescue (CSAR) team was dispatched in Black Hawk Super 68. The 15-men team roped down to the crash site. As the last 2 men rappelled down, an SNA RPG hit the helicopter, nearly severing the main rotor blades. The Super-68 limped back to base, leaving the rescue team behind. The team found both pilots dead and 2 wounded inside the crashed helicopter. Under intense fire, the team moved the wounded to a nearby collection point, building a makeshift shelter from Kevlar armor plates salvaged from Super-61's wreckage. At around 1640, Black Hawk Super-64, piloted by Michael Durant, was orbiting near the wreckage of Super-61. Yusuf Dahir Emoalam, commander of a 7-man SNA RPG team, spotted Super-64 and ordered his men to fire. One of Emoalam's men knelt down, aimed at Super-64's tail rotor, and fired, hitting the rotor. Initially, the helicopter seemed fine, but moments later, the tail rotor disintegrated. The helicopter spun violently, dropped 100 feet, narrowly missed large buildings, and crashed into tin shacks in an upright position. The crash destroyed several homes, causing flying debris to kill numerous Somalis, but it elicited cheers from the nearby crowd. Enraged local residents amassed and pushed towards Super-64. In the half hour after Super-64's loss, U.S. commanders desperately attempted to relieve the besieged troops. A small Ranger relief column was dispatched but lost 2 Humvees and 3 soldiers within a kilometer of the base due to coordinated ambushes. Shortly after, Charlie Company of the 10th Mountain Division's Quick Reaction Force also attempted to leave but was ambushed on Via Lenin Road. The 10th Mountain Division's Quick Reaction Force would not be able to reach the besieged troops for 9 more hours due to continuous ambushes and unrelenting Somali resistance. At the second crash site, 2 Delta snipers were inserted by Black Hawk Super-62. Their first 2 requests to be inserted were denied, but a third request was approved after the Mountain Division troops were ambushed. After 10 minutes of Super-62 giving fire support to the Delta snipers, an RPG slammed into the cockpit, ripping straight through the engine and knocking the co-pilot unconscious. Despite the damage, Super-62 was able to vacate the area and make a crash landing a safe distance away from the battle. Without fire support, the snipers were overrun, and all crew members were killed except Durant, who was captured by Yusuf Dahir Emoalam after nearly being beaten to death. For their actions, Delta Force pilots Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first awarded since the Vietnam War. Back at the first crash site, about 90 Rangers and Delta Force soldiers were under heavy Somali fire. Despite air support, they were effectively trapped for the night, spread over a 2-block area, fighting against enemies sometimes only a door away. Seeking shelter for their wounded, the Americans occupied 4 houses, detaining about 20 Somalis who lived there. Several children were locked in a bathroom until soldiers allowed them to rejoin their mothers, who later claimed the Americans had handcuffed them. At 1840, Colonel Sharif Hassan Jumali, managing the majority of Somali forces, received written instructions from aided to repel any reinforcements and prevent the Americans from escaping. Around 360 militiamen, along with hundreds of other armed Somali volunteers, encircled the first helicopter. Jumali ordered 6 60mm mortars to obliterate the buildings occupied by the Americans. However, an SNA officer informed Jumali that there were women and children in the homes. Consequently, Jumali ordered the mortars held in abeyance except to harass UN reinforcements. Aided later agreed with this decision, not wanting the local civilian population to turn against the SNA. American officers acknowledged that the presence of civilians prevented an attack but disputed the mortar's capability to wipe out Task Force Ranger. The SNA alleged that Americans used civilians as human shields, a charge vehemently denied by American officials. While waiting for relief, U.S. forces held their position in the homes. 6 little birds, working in pairs, strafed and pushed back the creeping militia, keeping the besieged Americans alive until dawn. As night fell, many volunteers and irregulars left the battle, leaving behind experienced SNA fighters. the shooting became less frequent but more accurate. After several failed rescue attempts, a significant effort was launched to relieve the besieged troops in Mogadishu. A relief column was hastily formed, primarily composed of Malaysian mechanized infantry, a Pakistani tank platoon, and U.S. infantry. At 11 p.m., this convoy of around 100 vehicles advanced into the city, led by Pakistani tanks. The convoy faced significant losses, with many wounded and several killed. They battled through a series of ambushes, splitting into two groups. Around the Olympic Hotel, one convoy came under heavy fire, leading to several more casualties and Malaysian APCs refusing to advance further. U.S. Humvees equipped with Mk-19 grenade launchers cleared key Somali firing points around the hotel, while U.S. troops engaged Somali fighters in street skirmishes. At 1:55 a.m. on October 4, 1993, the relief convoy reached Task Force Ranger Forces. Though Mohammed Farah Aidid had ordered Colonel Sharif Hassan Jumali to prevent any American soldiers from escaping, he became concerned with the mounting Somali death toll and the prospect of large-scale retaliation if remaining U.S. troops were killed. Aidid claimed he had ordered a corridor to be opened at dawn. Historian Stephen Biddle noted that the UN, not the SNA, disengaged to end the fighting, with the relief column fighting its way into and out of the Bakara market. As the convoy left the crash site, a group of Rangers and Delta operators found no room in the vehicles and used them as cover, proceeding on foot to a rendezvous point. This trek has been commonly referred to as the Mogadishu Mile. The battle ended by 6:30 on Monday, October 4th. U.S. forces were evacuated to the UN base by the armored convoy. By 7 a.m., all survivors had reached safety at an aid station inside the stadium on 21 October Road. Following the battle, the bodies of several U.S. casualties were dragged through the streets of Mogadishu by a large crowd of Somalis. Captain Had of the Somali National Alliance, SNA, justified this incident in an interview by claiming that the bodies were dragged by enraged civilians who had lost friends and family, not by SNA soldiers. He pointed to the July 12, 1993, Abdi House raid as a catalyst for the SNA's targeting of U.S. soldiers, stating that the mutilation of 73 Somali elders and leaders during that raid had fueled the Somali response. On October 6, 1993, U.S. President Bill Clinton ordered General Joseph P. Hoare to cease all combat operations against the SNA, except in self-defense. The next day, Clinton announced a major shift in the mission, sending substantial reinforcements to Somalia but planning to withdraw all American forces by March 1994. On October 14th, Aidid announced the release of Black Hawk pilot Michael Durant. 3 months later, all SNA prisoners in UN custody, including Aidid's lieutenants Omar Salad Elmi and Mohammed Hassan Awale, were released. 6 months after the Battle of Mogadishu, all U.S. forces withdrew from Somalia, leaving behind a 20,000-man UN force, which itself withdrew in 1995. The SNA leadership aimed to expel U.S. forces from Somalia following the Abdi House raid, understanding that Americans would not tolerate significant casualties in a conflict with no direct stake. They believed that inflicting notable casualties would turn Congress and the public against U.S. participation in UN, leading to a withdrawal from Somalia. The SNA's objective was not to achieve a tactical military victory but to sap the will of the Americans and force a complete disengagement from Somalia. As Jonathan Stevenson noted in Losing Mogadishu, Testing U.S. Policy in Somalia, the Americans had failed to recognize that the SNA, like the North Vietnamese guerrillas, was executing a strategy of attrition to achieve victory despite a high kill ratio, knowing they could absorb far more losses than the Americans could tolerate. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more captivating African history.